In 2025, President Donald Trump is taking direct aim at the Federal Aviation Administration, or the FAA, especially its Office of Commercial Space Transportation. According to the Trump administration, the FAA has spent the last several years acting less like a regulatory body and more like an obstacle, holding back American space innovation through outdated procedures and excessive paperwork. This isn't just rhetoric. Trump has already frozen funding for the FAA's Space Division, ordered a full review of their licensing process, and shifted key oversight responsibilities to a newly established body within the Department of Commerce. The move comes after years of complaints from industry leaders, most notably Musk, who has been openly critical of the FAA's approach to regulating space launches. And frankly, the criticism isn't baseless. For example, SpaceX's Starship rocket was physically ready to fly by mid-2022. The infrastructure in Boca Chica, Texas was nearly complete. The launch system had undergone months of testing. The engines were integrated. But the launch didn't happen, not for technical reasons, but because the FAA didn't grant the license. SpaceX was forced to wait nearly a full year for the required environmental and regulatory approvals to fly the first integrated Starship and Super Heavy booster. During that time, the FAA conducted extended environmental impact studies, public hearings, and safety evaluations that had already been partially covered in previous documents. At the same time, SpaceX continued to iterate on hardware and software, but they were essentially stuck in limbo. Eventually, the FAA granted the launch license, and on April 20, 2023, Starship finally lifted off for its first full-stack flight. It was a milestone, no doubt, but as most aerospace experts expected, the rocket did not complete the full mission. It exploded mid-flight after stage separation, as part of what SpaceX calls a rapid, unscheduled disassembly. Was this a failure? Not really. It was exactly what SpaceX predicted, a test flight. The point was to gather data, push the vehicle to its limits, and figure out what needed to be fixed for the next flight. But here's where the FAA stepped in again and arguably overstepped. Instead of issuing a new license for a second launch within a few weeks or months, the FAA required another lengthy mishap investigation. SpaceX couldn't launch again until every cause of the in-flight anomaly had been officially documented, reviewed, and signed off by the FAA. This process took nearly 7 months. In other words, the FAA reacted to a controlled test failure during a clearly labeled experimental flight as if something went catastrophically wrong in an unexpected way. But it didn't. Starship is a new system. Blowing up rockets during test flights isn't just normal. It's necessary. Musk expressed this again on social media, stating, "Starship will need hundreds of launches before it's safe for humans. If we wait for perfection before flying again, we'll never get anywhere." It wasn't until November 2023 that SpaceX received the go-ahead for the second launch. That launch also ended in a mid-flight termination, another learning opportunity. Yet again, the FAA initiated another long investigation, and SpaceX was told to wait. The irony here is hard to ignore. What exactly was the FAA expecting? That Starship would land astronauts on Mars on its very first try? This isn't the shuttle era. SpaceX operates on a test and iterate model. Fast launches, fast failures, fast improvements. The FAA, by contrast, is using rules and safety models designed for low-frequency, government-only launches. Their framework doesn't account for the modern pace of innovation. Trump's return to office has brought this issue front and center. Within weeks of taking office in 2025, he directed his administration to begin shifting commercial spaceflight regulation away from the FAA. Instead, oversight will fall under a new branch inside the Department of Commerce, working in coordination with the U.S. Space Force and private sector advisors. At the center of this shift is the newly launched DOGE project, an initiative that brings together commercial innovation and government funding to accelerate America's leadership in space. And at the heart of DOGE is none other than Musk. It's a bold move. Musk has spent years criticizing how government slows down progress. Now he's helping to redesign the way government approaches space entirely. This isn't just about Musk or SpaceX. Other companies, Blue Origin, Rocket Lab, even Sierra Space, have voiced concerns about regulatory bottlenecks. They may not be as vocal as Musk, but behind the scenes, most of these companies face the same delays when applying for launch licenses, updating permits, or expanding facilities. Of course, not everyone supports Trump's decision to limit the FAA's power over space launches. Some people say that taking the FAA out of the picture could make spaceflight less safe or harm the environment. Others are worried that Musk now has too much influence over federal space policy, since he's both leading a major space company and advising the government through the new DOGE project. But supporters of this change argue that the FAA was never meant to handle rockets in the first place. The FAA's main job is to manage airplanes, not space launches. The agency was built to make sure passenger planes are safe, pilots are trained, and flight paths are organized. That system works fine for planes, which fly every day along planned routes over cities and airports. But rockets are completely different. They go straight up into space. They're much more powerful. They don't follow regular routes, and they usually launch from remote areas. Yet the FAA has been using the same old rules from the 1980s. Rules written at a time when only a few rockets launched per year, and all of them were built by the government. This outdated system has caused major problems, especially for SpaceX. Companies like SpaceX expect some test flights to fail. That's how they learn what needs to be fixed. But the FAA treats every failed test like a full-blown accident, triggering months of paperwork, reviews, and delays. Trump and Musk both say that it's time to fix the system. Instead of having launch companies wait for approval every time, they want to set up a new system under the Department of Commerce, one that allows faster launches, uses real-time safety monitoring, and avoids unnecessary paperwork. They believe this approach will allow American space companies to stay ahead of countries like China, who are launching more and more missions each year without the same kind of red tape. The truth is, spaceflight in 2025 is not the same as it was in the past. SpaceX launched over 90 rockets in 2023 alone. Other companies like Rocket Lab and Blue Origin are growing fast. Reusable rockets are now common. Private companies are testing and flying hardware every month. And the FAA is struggling to keep up. This is why Trump is stepping in, and why Musk is now part of building a new framework through the DOGE project. If the government can fix the FAA, or at least take away its outdated control over space launches, SpaceX could achieve incredible things in a very short amount of time. In 2025, SpaceX has publicly shared that it plans to launch Starship up to 25 times. Just like how Falcon 9 launches nearly every week, SpaceX wants Starship to eventually launch often, carry more payload, and land safely for reuse. Now, even if they don't hit 25 launches this year, even if they manage to launch just 10 times, that's still a massive improvement. To put that into perspective, in 2023 they only launched twice, and both launches took months of waiting due to FAA license reviews and investigations. If the FAA wasn't in the way, they could have launched many more and gathered valuable data from each test. Looking ahead to 2026, things are going to get even more exciting. That's it for this video. Thanks for watching.